Jamie, can you hear me? Raise your hand, please. Okay, thank you. Seems so eerily silent. Mm.
Hello, everyone. I'm going to give it a couple more minutes for more folks to come in, and then we will begin.
For the last couple of nights, I've had something going on at 7, and 7 is the time in New York when everyone's banging their pots and pans and setting off their car alarms to celebrate the healthcare workers and to let them know that we're with them. So it's really interesting that because it's like right when I get on to do whatever I'm doing, then all this, I mean, it's much preferable to the sirens, but
Yeah.
interesting.
Kimberly, did you say it was much preferable to the silence or the sirens?
Sirens.
Okay, thanks.
All right, let's get started. Let me see, let me make sure all the settings. Zoom has all these new settings, so it's just a weird time. But, all right, Kimberly, you ready? Is it loud over there? Is anything going on over there?
In my apartment right now?
No, and outside.
Oh yeah, all the pots and pans and people hooting and hollering. Mm-hmm.
I was worried that I would have some sound going on, but it seems like all my neighbors want to chill, so I'm happy. So thank you all for being here. Thank you all for showing up, for having this vital conversation in a time that is bringing us all a lot of stress and feelings of the unknown, but you're all here willing to listen, open, and to learn and grow. So thank you all for being here. So to start, Kimberly, why don't you introduce yourself?
So my name's Kimberly, and for the last year and a half or so, Sabi and I have been in each other's worlds more closely. I'm here today to be a part of this conversation about specifically the impact of what's happening with both the virus and the social policies with the virus, and how there's a lot of narratives going around and how they're racially divided. So I'm here as a colleague and a friend and a bit of a mentor. So I'm a somatic experiencing practitioner, which is a kind of trauma resolution practice. I'm also a sexological body worker. I'm a birth doula, a postpartum advocate. I'm a single mom. And one of the orienting principles of my life is social and racial justice. And so I've been focusing my work first. So I have a degree in social policy and African American studies. And after school, I directed my attention towards equity in urban education. And then my life took a path towards yoga and body work. And I did that for about 10 years, 15 years. In the last 10 years, I've dedicated most of my life after having a child to women's health, to helping women heal from birth injuries, birth trauma, and sexual trauma. And I do that in a hands-on, hands-in way. So I actually touch pelvises, work internally to help women reconnect all of the layers of their system and particularly reclaim power in their pelvis. The next step of that is, and so although my courses have always been open to all races of people, I've noticed in the last couple segments of classes that I've taught that it's not, there's work to do for us in homogenous groups. And if we don't reclaim and have, or claim or reclaim, it depends, not everyone has something to reclaim, they're claiming it for the first time, power at our centers, then we actually can't hold ourselves in the difficulty that is conversations around race. So I became very interested in having women of color who could sort of take the torch of my work and the way that I've categorized it and be able to apply it in the communities as they see fit. And so I taught this Activate Your Inner Jaguar course, a real world understanding of the nervous system, about 7 or 8 times now. And Sabia's gonna take this work and specifically tailor it, and also have the leaders that are coming in to share their work be women of color. So I really feel strongly that just even learning from a white person or having the white person be the person in authority can sometimes just come to a point where it's not functional anymore because it's replicating the colonial dynamic. And so yeah, I'm here today and will be throughout the course to help Sabia in any way that she needs as she's coming into her own teaching this material.
It's so crazy. Like, people, sometimes I don't think people understand the depth of our friendship. And like, so it's so crazy to be in this space with you, because it's something I thought a year ago. I don't even know if I was putting in my brain that it would happen. So thank you for being here. Thank you for being my friend and my mentor. You're not kind of my mentor. You just are. So I'm Sabia. I am known as the Black Doula. Which was a conversation that started with me and Kimberly, actually. In my work, I'm a full spectrum birth worker. I am a doula business educator. I am a somatic experience practitioner in training. Currently, I have my doula training program, both school birthing advocacy doula trainings, and I also have my nonprofit in San Diego for the Village, which is a nonprofit that we give free services to low-income and marginalized communities while working with and training with people from the community to do those services, and we also pay them for their work. And so it's a big full circle. So now the reason why we're here today is to talk about trauma and race in a time of crisis. So I wanted to start off with a little bit of like how we got to this conversation and kind of how me and Kimberly, but we always meet on this conversation, but how this particular, with the pandemic, the conversations that we've had and how this has kind of led us here. So I'll begin with one, just really putting out there that right now is a very strange time, and it's a very new time. It's a very unprecedented time that we're in. And with the pandemic has come a lot of change, and the root of this conversation was me and Kimberly and I seeing people saying very privileged statements around the pandemic and how it's affecting the world or not affecting their world, and not being aware of people like myself who are dealing with a lot of loss, whether it's family members, routines, jobs, and also the disparities that are coming from this pandemic that are putting themselves out there a little bit more than they were before. So before we go into that, I wanted to just ask folks, like, how many of you have seen or read anything or experienced anything in relation to racial disparities and COVID-19? Raising your hands. Yes, for sure. I see you, LaShawn. Absolutely, yes. So I'll start a little bit with my personal experience so far as COVID goes, and we'll get into it from there. So in my personal experience, in the last, what has it been, 3 or 4 weeks, Kimberly? Like, I don't even know, because time is so.
Been like about 5 weeks. But before you go, I just want to invite everyone into their body, so
For
that
sure.
as you're listening, you're hearing it through your body and noticing your own reactions on a sensation level or an emotional level. And in a very simple way, notice if you're feeling like you want to move away from what's happening or you want to move toward it. And just give yourself a lot of space for that. There's no right or wrong way. There's no, it's happening in your own experience. So we're not necessarily going to know that. I feel a little bit trembly. I noticed I felt pretty cold right before this call started. I noticed as I started to talk and report now, my spine is kind of spiraling a little bit, as if my tail is the bottom of a top and the rest of my body is turning. And now a bit deeper breath came as I am narrating a little bit. And then Sabia, if you just want to presence what you're noticing, either sensation or emotion or imagery.
I would say for me, I feel more of like a weight on my throat, some shakiness. I would definitely say like pressure behind here, like right in this area. And my calf muscles are like, hey, my body's kind of in that like, let's move away, but we're going to stay here for a second.
When you name those things, does anything shift for you?
Yeah, so of course, like once I put it out there, my body starts to be like, we can chill. The shoulders drop a little bit. Things feel a little bit more calm, just naming the sensations and the feelings. And of course, you know, my very favorite thing to do is dissociate. So I can feel like when that's trying to like tick a little bit. But as I sit and settle, then I feel more present.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm just taking time to feel more present.
Mm-hmm. And when you say dissociate, I think that word gets a pretty bad rap. And one of the ways that I interpret that is when our mind and our body are working on separate tracks and our awareness starts to leave and become very distinct from our present moment felt sense experience, which in the past we did for very good reasons. So it's a developed pattern, but now Sabia is saying it's like, and everyone else calls her Sabia, by the way. I call her Sabia because in Portuguese, Sabia means wise, and Portuguese is my second language. So she said it was okay if I called her that. So it just stuck. I'm the only person who calls her Sabia, I think.
And now laughing with you, of course, my body's like, okay, we can wake up a little bit, move your shoulders, get a little movement going. Energy's more like, before it was kind of stuck here, now it's more flowing.
Mm-hmm. And you know, you teach a lot online, and so do I, but this is a new area of teaching for you.
For sure.
So I think it feels a little bit like, and I feel this way just speaking on race, is like it feels like a little bit of a bigger responsibility in a way, a bigger sense of threat or fear.
Yeah, and I also think it's like, you know, as we go into it, when you teach about something, when you can remove yourself from it, it's a different sensation versus right now, like in this whole pandemic, like I am in it. Like I am in the trauma, I'm in the experience. I'm not talking about it as if it happened a year ago. I'm talking about it as if it happened literally last week, because all these things have been happening presently. So it's a whole different type of feeling to teach about something and to be like not just in a teacher position, but be like, I'm standing right next to you because I'm also going through the same thing.
Yeah, I mean, of course, when we talked about this, you hadn't experienced all the loss that
Which
you've
is crazy, right?
Yeah, it's in the time that we've been talking about this for a long time, but in the time that we went from this being an idea to this being today, there's been a series of losses. So
Crazy.
We didn't predict that, but also it's like how there's when we're all in the middle of a certain kind of a rite of passage, and when you're in that rite of passage, you can't know the meaning to everything, right? We don't know that until after. It's like giving birth and trying to talk someone through like what the birth means to you, right? You don't know because you're not through it yet, and you have to be on the other side to see it. But what you do have is the freshness of the tools that you're living and using in real present time.
Mm-hmm.
So,
and that's like, and that's the difference. Like when we first talked about this, I was like, okay, I'm using these skills, and you know, and then we actually started to a few weeks ago finalize that we're going to put this out to the world, and then I experienced all this loss, and now it's like it has a different meaning to me. Like it's I don't want to say it's like it's not about a level of importance, but it's just one thing to teach about something, is one thing to just be in the middle of it and to be able to share that experience with people from a first, like there's no bullshit to it. Like there's no bullshit. Like everything that I'm going to be teaching, everything that I'm doing is some real life stuff that I'm doing to like keep myself regulated and healthy.
mm-hmm. So do you want to, probably everybody on the call doesn't know exactly what.
Yeah. Yeah, some of you know, some of you not. So like we said, we've been talking about this course for a while, but I'm gonna say about maybe 4 weeks ago, we like really put it into motion, like we're gonna do this thing. And then about 3 weeks ago, I think it was 3 weeks ago, I think it was a Saturday, my uncle on my mom's side died from COVID. Then on Sunday, my mom's father, so my grandfather, died from COVID. That same day, I became aware of my doula colleague, Angela, dying from COVID. And then 2 weeks later, which actually was this past week, as in been a week, it'll be a week tomorrow, my father's dad died from COVID. So uncle, maternal grandfather, paternal grandfather, and a doula colleague who was like amazing. So it's been a lot of loss in the last, I think all that happened within a 3-week time span. And it's been a lot of me applying what I've learned about my nervous system, what I've learned about trauma, and taking it from reading it to really heavily, actively applying it to my life. Literally for my survival, like that's how it feels. Like if I talked to you about this, I think I told you, but I was like, if I didn't have this skill set, especially with my own history of like anxiety and depression and all those different things, I was like, I don't know where I would be right now.
Yeah.
Literally.
So let's just take a moment, and there's lots of people sending you good wishes and
Thank you.
appreciation for your willingness to be in the middle of it and share, and just, you know, when this started happening with Sabia's family, and I was like, I want to see their pictures. I want to know their names. I want to know what's happening, how your mom is doing. And also just, I was very, I guess the word might be startled, or Sabia's family is in Jersey, that at that point in time, so I live in Brooklyn, and now I also know many people who have lost their parents here, or coworkers, or but at the time I didn't. And so here I was, like, my really close friend, and her Black experience is just radically different from my white experience. And also the narratives that were coming across my feed, being that I'm really in the health and wellness world, and what I was seeing is like, treat this like a cocoon, and here I'm going to send you an email on going on a retreat, and here's how you make this time in a retreat, and it just was so polarized and so distinct, the experience, that just gave more fuel to the fire of, like, okay, this is, if there's any time, it's now. Because
Sure.
also before Sabia experienced her losses, and before that, we were already saying, like, this is the thing. I don't know if any of you all had, when I was a kid and I had, they would do it at school, they would give you this pellet to chew. Like, it wasn't a fluoride tablet, but then it would make the parts of your teeth with plaque turn that color. So that they knew where you were brushing or not brushing. And to me, it was like this virus came in and then just put fluorescent highlights on all of the structural injustice in every way that there was inequality. And Sabia's like, well, welcome to my life as a Black person. Like, why are these white people freaking out about not losing their jobs and not paying rent? Like, we're dealing with that.
Oh my gosh, yeah.
And I think it was on the mastermind call.
It was on the mastermind call.
Where you were like,
we were
do you realize
we were
that
on the
I'm living in
mastermind
an
call.
alternate reality right now?
Yeah, we were in a mastermind call, and this when COVID had really, like, first put his, like, stuff, like, everyone needs to stay home, whatever, don't go to work, all this other stuff. And so we're in a mastermind call together, and I come already do my business little thing, and then we're having a conversation on COVID, and people were expressing their concerns, which is valid. And obviously, not obviously, but the mastermind call is generally more white people than people of color. And so I'm listening to people, and I was literally confused. I literally sent Kimberly a message like, you know, this is weird, right? Like, you know, this feels like an alternate reality where white people are worried about making rent and paying bills and having healthy lives, or whatever the case is. And I'm like, we worry about this all the time. My community is constantly talking about this. So I like, I was literally at a loss for words. Like I wanted to, I always empathize, but I was just like, this sounds like some weird, like, reversal of the roles because this is constant in my community. It's never not been a part of my community. So seeing people discuss it in such a way, it was just like, oh, wow. Like, and then the other thing, Kimberly, too, was when I see people discussing it, me as a Black person, seeing how affected white people were by the coronavirus, like, especially economically, I was like, watch, you're gonna do something about it. Something's about to happen. Like, and then you start seeing, you know, stimulus bills and all these other things. And in my brain, it was just like, when it's a time of crisis, everyone's affected. But I feel like when white people are affected, that translates to let's help. And when Black people are affected, is you should have done better, or you should be doing better. So this experience with COVID has brought up this conversation about trauma and race and the different ways that our experiences play a part. And the other thing that I want to say too is that in Kimberly's class, so the way that I was introduced to nervous system understanding, to somatic experience, to all of that was through Kimberly. And I've been in Jaguar courses. I'm in the current Jaguar course, and I'll continue going because I love it. But like Kimberly was saying, when I was in those courses, I would hear things about trauma, and I would hear things about the treatment of trauma, and I would hear these things, and I'm like, something just doesn't, like I said in my article, it's a framework that's built by white people for white people. So it just didn't completely connect to my experience as a Black person. So with all that being said, I guess, can we talk a little bit about trauma, Kimberly?
Go for it.
Maybe with an explanation of what is trauma.
You want me to explain?
Mm-hmm.
Well, why don't you give it a shot and I'll jump in if I think that I could help you out.
All right. So I guess one of the things I'll kind of refer to is the article that I sent you and that I'll send to everyone. But when I was talking about trauma in relation to this pandemic or in general, I feel like trauma is usually defined as like one event or some occurrence that happened that impacted you in a negative way, and that negative impact continues to follow you throughout your life. That's kind of how I see trauma, generally speaking. But the other thing that came up as I was experiencing this pandemic, as I was seeing my other community members experience the pandemic, was that trauma for me as a Black person is not just one event. Like, even with the deaths of, you know, my grandparents, my friends who were all people of color, it just felt like a confirmation of what is already going on. So like in a sense of racial inequity, health inequity, economic inequity, like housing inequity, like all these different things. So trauma can also be not just one event or one thing happening in your life. It can be something that's continuous and happening all the time. That make sense?
And
So I
that's
think
also
like
the way that, so an event can be traumatic, but in general, it's not the event, it's the way that your system is able to integrate it.
mm-hmm.
So for you, remember when you were saying like the funeral situation was bringing up past memories of funeral situations.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
And in your system, that is part of, like, I think it would be cool for you to talk through some of the ways that you helped yourself through this time, that you completely consciously chose to do things differently this time based on your past experience.
For sure. So for me, so one of the things that happened, so after my grandfather died, the first one on my maternal side, a week later, he actually did get to have a funeral service, but it was like, you can only have 10 people, you gotta follow social distancing, like all of that stuff was there. I'm in Atlanta and he's in Philly, so, and my mom is in Jersey. So I wasn't going up there anyway. I don't like funerals though. I do not go to funerals. The last funeral that I went to was my father's funeral when I was 13. He was shot and killed when I was 13. So I've never been to a funeral after that. So the day of my grandfather's funeral, I found that I was like dissociating. I was like really dysregulated, like emotionally, I was up and down. And I actually was doing, I wasn't doing work that day. But I was doing some type of activity, and I realized that I couldn't even focus on the activity. And so in my brain, I questioned, like, why are you dissociating so heavily? Like, today is a decent day. What is going on with you? And I realized, I was like, oh, it's the day of my grandfather's funeral. And my body is remembering what that felt like. Like all those past feelings that happened however many years ago. How old am I now? 31. My dad's been, I don't know, it's been several years now, was all coming back to me, not even consciously. So I remember I contacted you, and what I've been doing and what I did that day is that instead of running away from the discomfort, I've been pushing myself into it, but in ways that are healthy and productive. So some of it has been just noticing what's going on with me, recognizing it, not putting any judgment onto it. Because before I'd be like, I'm feeling anxious, that must be a bad thing. I'm dissociating, that must be a bad thing. But really understanding that my mind and my body are working alongside of me to help me get through this traumatic time in my life. And the other thing that I started doing that Kimberly was excited about is doing breath work. And breath work has been something, did I tell you the first time I did it? The first time I did it, I was like, let me just do this little video. Let me see what this whole breath work thing is about. Kimberly keeps talking about it. And so I did like a 10-minute video, and I was like crying, and like things were releasing. And I was like I literally felt from before I started the session till after, I can feel literally like the energy moving in my body and the tension releasing itself. And for me personally, I'm a person who's very contained. You know this about me. Like, I'm very contained. I'm not an outwardly emotional person. So a lot of times when things are happening, I know what's happening, but I'm not processing the emotion. Does that make sense? Like, I know this is sad. I know that this is whatever it is, but because of my own trauma response, it's just like, contain yourself, get through it, don't feel the emotion until some other time. But that's not good for me. Like, I've learned that's not good for me. So with breath work, it's allowed me to process my feelings and bring them to the surface in a way that works for me, calms my nervous system, and allows me to be present. So that's just one of the many things that I've been doing, as well as stalking you and and contacting my friends and doing what I need to do. But a lot of grief right now for me has been, instead of pushing away from it, stepping into it and not letting the trauma layer up until I collapse.
And I remember different days you're saying like, I'm just going to take these 3 days off. And normally I would just work more and I would fill up my days and like distract myself. But instead I'm going to lay in my bed and I'm going to let myself cry. I'm going to let myself collapse, but in a way where I'm going to be present to my experience rather than, be overtaken necessarily by it.
For sure. Yeah. And I feel like when we talked about, the trauma response, flight, fight, and freeze, I think for me, a lot of time, just in traumatic things that happen in my life, especially when it concerns death, I tend to go into freeze, where I'm not really feeling anything. I'm processing, because especially, as a person, but especially as a Black, queer, Black, like woman, I'm like, I have to still get shit done. Like, things still need to happen. Like, I don't have, and other times I haven't had a cushion that will allow me to rest. And even culturally, that's not always what's taught to you. Is this happen, whatever, move on because you need to. So for me, it's been a purposeful reprogramming of that. Like, there is no just stop and move on. It's stop, process your emotions. How do you feel? What do you need? Do you need to rest? Are you in freeze? Like, I literally have to ask myself sometimes, like, are you in freeze? Like, are you processing things that are happening? Do you know? Because especially when I dissociate, sometimes the whole day before, I don't remember what happened. So I've been doing things to purposely make myself present, to purposely help to calm my nervous system, to purposely heal myself. And it's been something that, as hard as it is to push yourself into grief, it's also something, at least for me in my personal experience, that has been really affirming, to be like, you can do this. You can do this. You can feel, giving myself permission to feel. Because I also feel like, as people of color, we don't always get permission to feel. So it's just been something that has been necessary for me to get through this as I'm getting through it. It's not like today it ended and tomorrow's going to be back to normal. It's a process that's continuous. So before we keep going, I wanted to kind of, the picture that you sent me, I wanted to show it. So one of the conversations that Kimberly and I were having when we talked about this whole pandemic was the different, like, polarized view of seeing what this pandemic is doing to humanity. And so we've had, I think you sent me a couple of things where, like, people are like, if you're on this diet with these nutrients and these supplements, you won't get, you know, COVID and you'll be fine. Or if you do this, you'll be fine. And I'm like, oh, because everyone has access to that. Because everyone has access to this supplement, this, that, this, whatever. And also that's not true. But nonetheless, we've been talking about people putting out solutions or putting out thoughts without any knowledge of what other people, especially Black, Indigenous, and people of color, of what we're experiencing. So this was an image that Kimberly sent me yesterday, and I'll show it. All right, I'll read it out loud just so that it's clear for everyone, and then we can discuss it a little bit. So it says this: traffic is gone, gas is affordable, bills extended, kids are at home with their families, parents are home taking care of their children, fast food replaced by home cooked meals, hectic schedules replaced by naps, rest, and relaxation. The air seems cleaner, the world quieter. People are conscious about hygiene and health. Money doesn't seem to make the world go round anymore. Doctors and nurses are being praised and recognized instead of athletes and celebrities. And we now have time, finally, to stop and smell the roses, the positive side above all. P.S. I'm pretty sure this was God's way of telling us to slow down and stop destroying his world. Do you want to go first, or do you want me to go first?
Go ahead.
So when I see things like that, and I've seen plenty, because my, you know, my Facebook and my Instagram is also, you know, wellness people and, you know, white people and whatever, like it's a mix. But I'm like, that is not my experience. I'm like, it is not my experience. Maybe I have some financial stability thanks to my hard work. But I've experienced more loss in this period of time than I've ever experienced. And it's not just my own personal loss, right? Like I named the 4 people that were close to me, but also seeing people that I know losing so many, like people that I know losing stability, losing, you know, like in the process of losing their homes, in the process of not knowing where they could turn, in the process of not being, even though unemployment is supposedly available for everyone, them either being denied or not being able to get the service. Like I've been seeing a whole different experience than that very nice, sweet, lovely vacation someone felt. Waiting for your thoughts, Kimberly.
Well, a lot of times when it's hard for people to deal with grief and loss or the unknown, then spiritualizing is a popular way to go. So if you can't deal with death or you can't deal with the discomfort even of your own privilege, then it's easy to generalize, and instead of dealing with structural realities, to sort of go into this realm of universality, right? That's the realm where people say race doesn't exist and we're all one, right? Because we're all children of God. It's the same kind of it's the same direction. So instead of addressing and facing the pain of I loved what Resma wrote yesterday. Like, before this virus of COVID, there was the virus of racialization that preceded this by hundreds and hundreds of years. And what we know about trauma is it's called an associative stack. So Sabia mentioned the funeral and then an earlier death and a funeral. And if we haven't had a time to metabolize the earlier trauma, then the impact of the next thing that reminds us in our implicit memory, so the memory that's not in our brain, but the memory that's in our body, is going to heighten our response. So in this case, the trauma of racialization and all of not just microaggressions, because that's the least of the problems at this point, that is going to be one of those layers. And so, as we know, in a situation where healthcare is a part of it, do you say BIPOC? Do you actually pronounce that word?
Mm-hmm.
BIPOC. Okay, I never said that out loud.
Yeah.
I said POC or something else. Then the lived experience, and then you also wanted to talk about intergenerational trauma, but the way that impacts not only the DNA but the expression of that is carried through. So if someone has earlier, Sabia's partner Vera is from Brooklyn, and she's been having a hard time the last week or so, and I was like, it just hit me today because I had a car today for, it's not important why, but anyway, I drove around the city and I realized, oh, well, if you're from here and you're not here, that's already anxiety provoking, because it's like being away from family when they're suffering. It's so hard to be separate.
Yeah.
But then also when you know this Brooklyn hospital in the site specific places where there's not enough equipment and you know the people, then of course that's going to elevate your anxiety, together with if you have healthcare, you've been ignored in healthcare, which is a daily reality. If your pain
Yes.
is considered pain, right? So I think that probably everyone knows on the call, but like Black, brown women, Indigenous people get shitty healthcare and are not taken seriously. Their pain isn't considered. They're not like in medicine. There's and I have a podcast with Deidre Cooper Owens explaining an experience that she had unanesthetized like 5 years ago. So not like 40 years ago, like very recently, because of the assumption that white and Black bodies would feel pain differently.
Yep. And one of the things that I just wanted to read off a couple of things that are happening with COVID, and then we can go into the rest of the conversation. So this was from yesterday, actually. It was an article in The Guardian, and it says, research from the last decade has shown minorities are more likely to live in healthcare deserts. One study found Black Americans were on average nearly 70% more likely to live in a zip code with a shortage of primary care physicians. African Americans in some major US cities are also more likely to live in an area with no hospital trauma center within 5 miles. And specifically when it comes to actually in New York, I believe it's in here. One of the conversations around New York was, oh, here we go. An analysis last week by the New York Post found that 22 of the 30 most tested zip codes in New York City, the center of the national outbreak, are whiter or wealthier than the city's average demographic profile. So there's been a lot of statistics recently coming out about the racial disparities And the crazy thing about it, the statistics that are coming out are not even, they're not even fully done with the research, because a lot of the states aren't even releasing the racial information. They're putting out if someone is a man or a woman, but not, they're not putting out that racial information. I know, like, for example, in New Orleans, about maybe a couple weeks ago, 70% of the people that died from COVID were African American, while only, I think, 30% or less is their actual population of African American people in New Orleans. There's also very similar statistics in, I mean, states and cities all across the US, as of what we know right now from the little information that's being released. So with that being said, one of the things that I wanted to talk about is what
I think, can you guys hear me? Oh, okay. I assumed that it was my computer. So I'm sure that Sabia will come back in. She probably had to stop her recording and come back on. So I'm sure she'll be here in a moment. She just texted me to tell me that she's coming back on. So while she's coming back on, maybe just give your eyes a break from your screen if you haven't already, just because there's so much screen time, and let your eyes just wander around your space a little bit. Let your eyes and your head move, and take some time to look above you and below you. If there's any movements that feel like they would be good, like a yawn or a stretch. Are you back, Sabia? I see your name, but I don't see you.
Wait.
Oh, there you are.
Yeah.
Yay.
my like power went out.
Your whole power in your whole apartment? You're frozen again.
Hey, can you hear me?
Now I can, yeah.
Okay. Yeah, my power like went out.
In
And I
your
was
whole in your whole room?
yeah, yeah.
Weird.
I know. I was
So
like,
do you know when you froze? You froze when you were starting to, you had just talked about the statistical disparities, and you were starting to talk about the next layer of how this is disproportionately affected Black and BIPOC communities.
yes. So the next thing I wanted to talk about was now I'm talking to you on my iPad, so the angle is different. But so the thing I want to talk about next was how do we, like, what are the next steps, right? Like, now that we can recognize the trauma that's happening, now that we can recognize the difficulty of the trauma, now the question is, what do we do next? Ooh, can you hear me now?
Yeah, we can hear you.
I'm switching to my computer. Sorry for the technical difficulties. Let me see. Oh, no. Wait. All right. No. Okay. Now we're all set. We're all back.
I think
Okay.
some people, before you move on to next steps, I think some
Mhm.
people are sharing, like Ciara said, she saw an article that 100% of deaths in Richmond are Black people.
Definitely not hard to believe.
And then Angel, I think that's how her, Angel or Angel, she said, because Black folks primarily have ongoing health conditions prior to COVID, and our healthcare is little to non-existing because we cannot afford it or do not have access. This makes sense.
And I think, like, when we first started talking about when it started to come out that Black people specifically were being affected at a higher rate, that was the first thing that we heard was the cause was because of the underlying conditions. And the part that was upsetting about that was when we talk about underlying conditions with Black people, it's not because our bodies are just more prone to diabetes or like our bodies are more prone to heart issues. That's not the case, right? We have to think about stress, chronic stress, ongoing stress, like literally generational just stress, especially being in the US. You have to think about inability to access healthcare, inability to access quality healthcare, inability to access quality food, the inability to have the right preventive measures, the right education, the inability for us to see ourselves in our healthcare system, right? So if you're not seeing yourself in the healthcare system or just in the world and these like places, these higher places that these structural, exactly, systemic racism and structural racism, then of course we have more underlying conditions. So when I see that kind of report, I'm like, can you at least talk about the reasoning for that and not make it seem like it is the Black people's fault for what they've been enduring and what they now have to endure because of this pandemic. So moving on, now that we have more stability, so annoying to have the blame shifted, exactly. And also, like, in this situation, it's like, especially as a Black person, it's like we have to feel so many things. Like, I'm feeling anger because of the, for lack of a better word, fucked up system that we have going on. I'm feeling sadness because I'm losing people. I'm feeling anger and sadness because I'm seeing my friends in my community lose people or lose their jobs or lose opportunities or lose these things that were somewhat giving them stability. But then my other frustration was sometimes when I personally, before I got into nervous system understanding specifically, I would look into like, how do I treat this feeling or how do I, get myself better? And I would find ways that didn't seem like they fit me. They didn't fit my culture. They didn't fit or understand the generational trauma that's in my lineage. Like they didn't understand the common things that I face. And when we talked, I was like, when it comes to PTSD and any form of PTSD, when we talk about treatment, the treatment usually goes into some type of, let's talk about and mimic or get you to understand some form of safety. And when you understand that form of safety and you feel that, then you can bring that into your present life. And I'm like, what form of safety do I feel? What are you talking about? Like, that was my biggest thing. I was like, where's the safety that you talk about? Because me as a Black person, when I leave my house, I'm already on guard. I don't know how people are perceiving me, if they feel safe with me. I don't know. Even when I'm going to a therapist, does this white therapist get my perspective? Does this therapist have maybe their own bias or discrimination or racism towards my community, right? It's like all these different feelings. So I say all that to say, the trauma skills and the nervous system understanding that I've learned from people like yourself, but being able to filter it through my lens has helped me to create forms of safety within myself. Does that make sense? Like, and when we talk specifically about the pandemic and when we talked about putting this class together, that kind of was my whole thought was, how do I become a vessel of teaching other people of color how to create safety within themselves? And that has become like the whole focus of this course that we're gonna put together, and this knowledge and this understanding, because to be a person of color is just a different experience. It's a great experience in its own ways, but it's a different experience. And when things like this happen in the world, like this pandemic, it just brings to light all the trauma that we carry from day to day, right? Because it's like, I have good days for sure, but even on those good days, I'm thinking about the inequity that my identity comes with. Like, I'm thinking of what it means to be a Black person. I'm thinking about how, like I said, how people are perceiving me, what opportunities will or will not be given to me, what my family has to go through, all these things that are, I don't know, like an underlying kind of presence through my existence. Reading some of the comments.
Well, and I think one of the things that you wrestled with a little bit is like at the beginning of the journey of like official trauma studies, like how much do you have to know to be able to pass something on? And what you and I have been, in dialogue about is your ancestors had all of these quote unquote trauma skills.
Mm-hmm.
There was already many, many ways that indigenous earth-based cultures metabolized things that could be traumatic. And then what happened is this became a field of study, and in the field of study that is predominantly white and predominantly men, those things like humming, it cracks me up when people like prescribe humming, because it's like, well, humming is just kind of something you do, but like I'm glad it's now like a prescription and a list of things to do. That it doesn't really make sense to abstract the sort of like suck the meat out, the juice out of the meat, and then represent something to you that in your bones is also in. So there's intergenerational trauma, but there's also intergenerational wisdom and intergenerational resilience and intergenerational brilliance and intergenerational, all of those things that are inherent to you and your experience.
Exactly. And I think like sometimes, definitely when I see people like prescribing things like humming or, just some things that you see when it's just like, drumming or just something that you're like, come on, like we've been doing this. Like, this is like how we've survived all this time. Like, these are things that we know, things that I feel like even now, like I'm becoming more aware of, probably because of this work, of the way that my reactions to things. And if this makes sense, I don't know if it will, but sometimes my reaction to things, even physically or emotionally, I'm like, that didn't come from me. That came from the ancestors that knew what to do in this time. That came from that wisdom of knowing, like, this thing, like even now, I'm like, the way that I'm being held up is because of the generations before me that were able to get through things like this and knew the tools and knew the skills and knew everything that was needed to get beyond this and to recover. And I also think as a person of color, we sometimes lose connection with that. And we lose connection with it because we have capitalism, we have, Eurocentric kind of ways of being is the right way to be. We have all these messages that, tell us every day in some type of way that what we are or how we are isn't enough or is not good enough. So now I feel like I'm reversing and going into like, actually everything that you are right now is absolutely amazing. Like everything that you do right now is absolutely amazing. Like your ancestors, the generations before you have prepared you for where you are right now. But it's like awakening that part of myself again. Our ancestors are powerful. We need to channel them and not forget our history. And that's hard, Linda, right? Like, especially for Black people and brown people and just people, indigenous people. If you want to learn your history, you got to do that shit by yourself. Like, our culture doesn't necessarily educate us on how powerful we have been and always will be. A lot of us are told that's wrong or evil somehow. Stephanie says, it's so hard you have to dig. For sure. So Kimberly, are you ready for the next step of this whole thing? I can't hear you. Where are you? I was like, wait a minute.
Sorry, I muted myself because I didn't want to excess noise. I don't know what the next step is, but I'm always ready for wherever you want to take me.
So we talked about what trauma is. We've talked about this current pandemic and the different experiences that are presenting themselves for different races. We've also talked about my current journey, which is like, as I do this work, I'm just like, I don't know, sometimes I see myself as a very like not vulnerable person, but I'm like, maybe I am kind of vulnerable. Like maybe I am like putting myself out there more. And then we talked about what we feel is somewhat needed, is needed in order for us to heal and recover. And the main focus of that is understanding ourselves, understanding our nervous systems, understanding where we come from, understanding how all that plays a part and how we will get through this. Because this pandemic, especially for BIPOC communities, is going to be felt, like the effects of it and the trauma from it is going to be felt for years to come. And that's also another thing that I've been annoyed with, is that I've been seeing people like, oh, when this is over, we'll just da-da-da. And I'm like, not my community. Like, we're going to spend years and years and years recovering from this. Economically, mentally, physically, everything's going to take so much time to recover. Probably longer, of course, than white people in this current world. So the next thing I want to do, Kimberly, unless you have some other things that you're thinking about, is present what we have coming up. Ready?
Go for it.
So what we will be doing in honor of that is that it's so weird. I can't believe this is happening. Can't believe it's happening. But yeah, so our next step and what I'm offering, and we are offering, but it'll be a 4-week course called A Lifetime in Quarantine. And this 4-week course will be teaching trauma skills and nervous system understanding, specifically for Black, Indigenous, and people of color. That's so weird. I've never said this in public.
Declaration.
So, yes, the declaration. So in this 4-week course, I'm actually going to share the screen so that everyone can see what we're up to, and it'll
I
make
feel like
me,
you should, I don't know, is there like a movement in your body that represents that declaration? Because you're kind of staking a claim right now. You're kind of like putting
um,
something in your territory, or maybe you're just like in your queen chair.
oh, I'm in my queen chair, you know, you know, I be, yes, but I feel good. I feel like, because, you know, I was nervous before this call, because I'm like, I speak to people about this, but I don't speak about it so publicly yet. Um, but now I feel more like, you know, that electricity feeling, like going all around, but in a good way. That's what's happening now. How are you feeling? Because this is your baby. Jaguar is your baby.
It is, and this is a very exciting moment for me because as you know, it's been a bit of a quandary to how to be of the best service with it. So I couldn't be more thrilled.
Yes, same. So I'm gonna share the screen just so people can see it and kind of follow along with it. Because I know for me, sometimes when someone's saying something, I'm like, can I also read it? So I'll just show you what this 4-week course is going to be about. And I'm super, super excited about it. Like, we have such bomb speakers. Like, when I looked, like, even though I put this together, I was just like, what? Black, black, black on black, black, black. Like, I was just like, because I never get to see courses that look like this, like just people of color doing amazing work. So like I said, A Lifetime in Quarantine, which is going to be a 4-week course, trauma skills and nervous system understanding for Black, Indigenous, and people of color, and reigniting what we already know. So one of the things I want to emphasize is that the things that we're going to teach you are, you know, maybe you're going to be putting new words to it, understanding yourself. But I also want you to understand that this is in us. We're just reigniting it and getting more acquainted with it. So some of the things that you will learn in this class is how to move out of freeze in a way that respects your natural ebbs and flows. Like I said, I'm a person, especially when it comes to death, where I freeze up and I'm just numb. But now I've learned how to move out of that state and how to respect the feelings that I'm having. We're going to talk about the effects of intergenerational trauma, race, in our current times on our nervous systems and what the world is missing about our unique experience. We're going to also talk in depth about the nervous system. We're going to get some practical and accessible emotional regulation practices. What was really important to me, and I think me and Kimberly talked about this, was that in order for us to talk about healing and recovery, you need to have something that you can access. Like, if it's something that you can't access, then you can't use it. So that was a big focus for me, and a reason why I'm doing this SC work is because all of this stuff is accessible and it's things that you can learn for yourself. And also how to break out of the tradition of grin and bearing it and into a new tradition of presence, process, and release. To move out of self-doubt and judgment into radical respect and admiration. And also to connect our history and ancient wisdom to how we will connect and flourish in these current times. So who is this class for? Black, Indigenous, and people of color. All of you. I want all of you. If you're a healer in your community, if you are present in your community, if you're needing to slow down, if you're needing to understand yourself, if you're needing to learn these skills so that you can bring it back to your community, this class is for you. Or if you're just doing it for yourself, this class is for you. White accomplices are also invited. So just to get a little bit of a breakdown of what a white accomplice is. A white accomplice is someone who is not willing, but they are doing the work to create racial equity by following the voices in the direction of the people that it affects, right? So that means that you are a white person who is ready to do the work, who is ready to be led by Black, Indigenous, people of color, and you're ready to follow what we say needs to be done for the next steps in this world. So our class format, just give you a little bit more details. That is going to be 4 weeks. We're going to meet on Tuesdays and Thursdays. On Tuesdays, you will be with me and Kimberly. On Thursdays, you will be with our guest speaker, which I will tell you about in a little bit. So weekly lessons, and you also get a private Facebook community where we keep the conversation going and announce some surprise things that we'll have too. So then of course the question is, how much is it? Like, it's always the question. So what Kimberly did and what I'm doing as well is that we actually have 3 levels of purchase options. The reason why we're doing that is we want to make this class as accessible as possible. And it's also self-selected. So you pick what you feel you're able to do. So the 3 levels of that is community, which pays for you at a discounted rate. Then you have sustainer, which pays you at the full rate. And then we also have supporter, and this supports another as well as yourself. So the point to bring up about that is that if you are someone who needs a community rate, take the community rate. If you're someone who has the ability to be a supporter, please do, because that allows for us to give more seats to people that may not be able to pay that rate or pay full rate or even pay anything at all. So now let's talk about the guest speakers. So this is me. The first guest speaker is Juliana Luna, actually who was referred by Kimberly because Juliana was, she was teaching about the menstrual cycle in a Yoruban perspective. So she will be there and she's amazing. She's gonna be teaching the Luna method. And she's my friend, we're such friends now. Then we have Samaya Franklin, Sumi. Some of you may be familiar with her. Her Instagram is Sumi's Touch. She is a bomb midwife in Oakland, and she'll be talking about birth imprint, understanding our perinatal trauma and psychology. Then we also have Miriam Ajayi, who is actually my breathwork practitioner. I just did a session with her on Friday, and she's amazing. And I'll be working with her every 2 weeks from now on. So she will be teaching as well. And she'll be teaching about breathwork as a tool to heal trauma and navigate crisis. And then last but not least, we have Rashida Kambe Miller, and she'll be talking about reclaiming rest, radiance, and pleasure through sensual movement, which I'm super excited about. Like, I'm just gonna be on the screen going crazy. So the other thing that I wanna tell you about, as well as everything else, is that today we have a coupon and it's gonna be a super early bird special. And the word for that, the code for that is HEAL, H-E-A-L, and that will give you $40 off of any price level, whether it's community, sustainer, or supporter. Kimberly, any thoughts?
I think you've done a great job in just emphasizing that the class is about the physical, spiritual, emotional metabolization of everything that's going on. So the guest teachers and you will be talking and raising consciousness issues and addressing the subject from various ways, but it's also about being able to move through. So we're taking as little tension forward as possible and creating more space, because I know finances have been like a really big thing for you too. Like we've talked about, like if this would have happened last year or, you know, another.
Oh my gosh, if this would have happened last year, I would have been like, what the fuck? You know what I mean? Like, and it's crazy now to be like in this position where like I'm okay in that way, because it's allowed me to be more present for myself and also for my community. Like, if I didn't have that, I don't think I could be here right now, ready to grow with my community.
Yeah, because all of your energy goes into survival and there's nothing left because you're so concerned about, you know, the material things. People are asking if there's an expiration date to the code.
So I don't know if I figured that out yet.
Okay. The classes will definitely be recorded. I think probably because some people are like wondering about my involvement, and that too, we haven't decided. So if we decide that it's a better space without me, then I won't be there. And if we decide that it's a better space with me, then I will be there.
Yeah. And also the classes will be recorded. So if you miss the class, you'll have access to to that recording pretty much the same day. So on Tuesdays and Thursdays, it's going to be 2 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, which is 11 a.m. PST. Yes, the $40 off is the early bird pricing. So for example, if you buy a course for $189, that would be a regular price, and then it'll be $149 at the early bird price. Yeah, and I think I think one of the things that's been interesting with me and you is like our relationship definitely goes across like the racial lines, right? And I remember one of my friends, Shay, who's actually in here, she's always like, you and Kimberly's relationship is so cute. And I'm just like, it just is what it is, because I'm able to be my full self with you, and there is no weird thing. And I like
somebody once told me that, you know, it's a real friendship if your Black friend can talk to you about whiteness and white people and put down white people, but the white person doesn't get offended.
Yeah,
like
exactly.
That.
But it's so funny because you also just send me stuff where you're like, what is this white person doing? Like, why is this happening? And I'm like, damn, I didn't even see that. Like, yeah, that's crazy. But for the class, you're definitely going to be there, and I'm excited and I'm happy, and I think it's going to be a fun time. And also, if you're in this class, you'll be getting an email within the next few minutes, well, after this recording, with the recording as well as the code and all the information, just in case you haven't caught it here.
I think it's really, you know, there's some things to me that I don't know if I take them for granted, but I've just been the minority in so many BIPOC spaces myself. So I'm kind of used to that experience, but that is not a usual experience for so many white people. And I think that for the white people on the call, that might be an unusual experience. It's really worth it. Just like if you're used to only ever learning from men and you can't take any information because you don't associate authority with women, to be in this space where the teachers are all Black, if that's something that you have never experienced, and experience what it's like to be to be learning in a language that's not your first language, perhaps even, and learning in a way that's maybe less linear, more circular. And that in and of itself is an action that starts to destabilize and decentralize the way that power has been constructed. So it is, if you're wondering, well, how is it going to be for me as a white person here? It's a good exercise because, first of all, it's online. So like the level of threat is, let's face it, pretty low. You know, it's much harder to be in person and have these kinds of conversations. So if, you know, and I teach a lot of classes on sexuality, and the same goes for that. Like, it's a lot less threatening for people to think about being in a room talking about sexuality than being in a Facebook forum talking about sexuality. So if this conversation is important to you as a white person, and you want to be an, I keep saying accomplice. Back in the 90s, that wasn't a word that was like so popular in the lexicon. Then this is a great opportunity to be in a space and be able to be a part of the solution and practice those things that we're hearing about.
Yeah, and I think like it's really important because I, you know, obviously with the work that I do, I obviously focus a lot on race, and whether it's like, you know, in birth work and all these things that I do, but I get a lot of people, white people, saying like, well, what can I do? How can I help? What's the next step? And I'm like, be present. Be present when you don't have to be. Be present when it has nothing to do with you. Be present when the focus is not on you and someone who has your experience, right? Like, be present so you can learn about someone else's experience, especially with anything that we do. Like, if you're a white person, you probably have Black friends or brown friends or indigenous clients or whatever, and you need to understand maybe why they function differently from you, why they absorb something differently from you, why their experience is different. And as a white accomplice and as a white person who calls himself someone who wants to be a part of this movement of racial equity and access, you have to actually do the work, right? And so in this class, it is definitely BIPOC led. It's going to be centered around people of color, but it's a great learning opportunity for white accomplices to understand, and like you said, to change the shift of the power. Because in most spaces, like myself, we talked about it when I was in SE training in Sacramento. I was like, there was, 40 or 50 people, but it was like 2 Black people. Like, it was like, so even though I was in a space where I was learning and I was happy to learn, that power dynamic was still there. So to call yourself a white accomplice is to invite that shift of power and experience it so you can promote that as a normal way of being, like a normal way of existing.
Yeah, and that you have practiced in your lived experience of sitting in the discomfort, because it is uncomfortable. It's uncomfortable, and there, when the argument gets intellectual and hyper rational, then we can all believe certain things, but it's different to actually sit in the discomfort in that felt sense experience and build capacity so that then we can come together in spaces that are not online. We can be with other white people and be really uncomfortable and still have the conversation that we need to have. We can be in our job and still be having the conversations that we need to have. And it takes practice to build that capacity to sit in the discomfort and not just go back, because this is the other thing we talked about, the self-protectionism, right? So everyone feels under threat. So then I'm just going to protect my family. I'm just going to protect my stuff. And that the possibility for a white person to do that, to just recoil and like hoard my resources, rather than this being a time of shaking that loose and like, let's use this change to actually turn the other direction and start making some of these things shift in a direction that we want them to go. We might not know how to make them go that way, but this is one solution of being in a space together and going through some of that.
Yeah, and that, like, you bring me back to my quote that I have on my page. I'm like, everyone wants to be, anti-racism or whatever when it's comfortable. Like, it's easy to be in the fight or the movement when you're comfortable, you're chilling, you got your routine, everything's great, whatever. Now it's that time, like you said, to shake that loose and say like, okay, maybe I'm not comfortable, but I'm also still willing to do the work because I'm dedicated to not only my tribe of what looks like me, but also to the people that are going to be affected by this the most in the long run. Let's see, Melanie says, I want to be comfortable in a group of white people having necessary healing conversations. For sure. We all do. But for now, we're going to end the class. This was good. I had fun. Always happy to see your face. I would like to see your face in person, but we'll see when that happens. And I would like to thank everyone for coming. Kimberly, do you have any last words?
Just feeling proud of you.
Oh, thank you. I know. I can't wait to hug you. It's gonna be like a 5-minute hug. But thank you, everyone. Like I said, if you're here, you will get the recording, or anything that you need will be answered in the email that will come out shortly. And all I can say is thank you.
Yeah, and if the course isn't for you, but you want to contribute, Sabia's Venmo link is there. She runs a nonprofit that links up doulas, volunteer doulas, with families of color that don't have access to doula support. Although at the moment, doulas are that's a whole other webinar.
I know. I know.
But if you just want to support the work, then that will go towards it, because there will also be scholarships for this course, and that'll be able to make that possible.
Yes, but my last words is thanks for everyone who came today, who showed up, who sat in discomfort, who had the conversation. And of course, I love you. That's for you, Kimberly. I love you. I always tell you I love you.
I love you too.
Bye-bye.
Bye.